Hello, my name is Gustav Hägg. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Sten K. Johnson Center for Entrepreneurship at Lund University. Today we're here at Ideon Agora, which is an entrepreneurship hub for new and emerging companies. And today I'm going to talk about entrepreneurial decision making. In this module on entrepreneurial decision making, I will address three things. First, to give a background to the importance of decision making, I will discuss the risk-uncertainty continuum developed by Frank Knight. After this discussion on risk and uncertainty, I will move to the second part of this module, which addresses the difference between programmed and non-programmed decision making. This discussion will be connected to the first part and the differentiation between risk and uncertainty when making decisions. Moving into the final part of this module, I will address two decision-making logics that have gained traction when understanding how entrepreneurs act and behave. In this part, I will address the logic of effectuation and the logic of causation, where effectuation is a decision-making logic developed by Sarah Saraswati based on how expert entrepreneurs think, whilst causational logic is tightly connected to managerial decision-making. Frank Knight, an economist from the University of Chicago, developed in the early 20th century the idea behind the risk-uncertainty continuum in order to address the differences between profits. It is a continuum that spans from calculated risks towards true uncertainty. We may, for example, talk about the risk of a loss, but the uncertainty of a gain. In his risk-uncertainty continuum, Knight addresses three types: a priori and statistical risk, and uncertainty. He related risk to objective probabilities and uncertainty to subjective probabilities. First, we have the differentiation between a priori risk and statistical risk. A priori risk is based on homogeneous classifications of instances and is used in games of chance, such as throwing dice in a casino. The throwing of a dice makes it possible to assign numerical probabilities on the basis of knowledge of the relevant chances in each case. For example, we know that the probability of throwing a 3 in the next toss may be assigned a probability of 1/6. Statistical risk, on the other hand, is based on induction of data from many homogeneous but different groups, built on empirical and historical data. For example, insurance companies build their assessments upon risk calculations, where historical data based on many different groups of individuals act as input to calculate the level of risk when setting the price premium of car insurances. And by having historical data on many different groups, the insurance company is able to calculate the premium of car insurances for different groups based on age, gender, and other variables of importance. Risk, either a priori or statistical, is present when managers know the possible outcomes of a particular course of action and can assign probabilities to them. However, according to Knight's risk-uncertainty continuum, the adoption of a priori probabilities is rarely used in business, where statistical probability is much more common. The third part is uncertainty, also addressed as Knightian or true uncertainty, where neither a priori calculations nor statistical calculations based on historical data exist. Uncertainty exists when the probabilities of alternative outcomes cannot be determined and future outcomes are unknown. True uncertainty is based on estimates and judgment. Therefore, true uncertainty relies on the capacity of the intelligent entrepreneur to form more or less correct judgment about the course of action, based on an intuitive sense of values which is confirmed by experience. When entrepreneurs face risk or uncertainty, they still have to engage in making decisions on how to proceed. From psychology, we have gained plenty of insights on how humans make decisions based on both intuition and based on judgment that varies from programmed to non-programmed. In relation to the discussion on risk and uncertainty, we can relate program decisions to the risk continuum, and especially the statistical risk that entrepreneurs face when running the day-to-day business. Program decisions are automatic and routinized responses based on prior experience where the individual have developed a formal decision rule or guidelines that are being applied when certain situations occur. For example, waking up in the morning, most individuals place their feet on the floor in order to sit up and thus begin the morning routine. Non-programmed decisions are a bit trickier and occur in unusual, unpredictable situations where information is incomplete and renders a situation where the individual is limited by their bounded rationality. Bounded rationality as a term was coined by Herbert Simon as a way to describe situations where the number of alternatives an individual must identify is so great and the amount of information so vast that it's difficult to even come close to evaluating it all before making a decision. The non-programmed decisions are largely related to uncertainty. When being in a situation that requires non-programmed decisions, individuals have to rely on either intuition or reasoned judgment, where the information is ambiguous and often there is a time constraint that leads to a phenomenon called satisficing. Satisficing means that managers explore a limited sample of all potential alternatives through searching for and choosing an acceptable or satisfactory response to problems and opportunities rather than trying to make the optimal decision. Depending on time and the cost of getting the necessary information to make a non-programmed decision, an individual either make use of intuition or reasoned judgment. Intuition is a faster way of making a non-programmed decision, but it's full of biases and does not generate an understanding of how to reach a satisfying decision. It is what could be called jumping to a fast conclusion without understanding the rule sequence of how to make the decision. Reasoned judgment, on the other hand, is a slower process of making a non-programmed decision on how to act. It does not lead to less error in decision making, but it does, on the other hand, lead to the development of rule sequences that generates an understanding of the non-programmed decision that has been made. In contrast to the use of intuition, reasoned judgment is slower and based on analytical reflection that at least warrant an understanding that can be used in future uncertain situations. Building further on the previous discussion on risk uncertainty and programmed versus non-programmed decision making, there's two main logics discussed and elaborated on in entrepreneurship. The two logics are to be seen as two extremes on a continuum of how entrepreneurs act and make decisions in the venture process. The two logics have been emphasized especially through the work of Sarah Saraswati and her conceptual and empirical work on expert entrepreneurs, which has rendered in the conceptualization of effectuation. In her research, she developed a thought-out experiment based on starting up a game company focused on education, which she tested on expert entrepreneurs through using a think aloud protocol, where the expert entrepreneurs talk through the experiment and how they would make decisions in the different scenarios in the experiment. To explain the effectual logic of how expert entrepreneurs make decisions, Saraswati compared the effectual logic with the causational logic, often equated to managerial decision-making processes, where the input is known and the future output is predicted based on the chosen resources. Causational logic follows a linear, path-dependent way of thinking that is highly routinized, goal-oriented, and based on prior historical input. In this sense, causational logic is related to statistical risk analysis and to program decision making, where planning and prediction has received an important place. A main sign of causational logic is its focus on selecting between given means in order to meet the predicted goal. This linear way of thinking is equated to managerial and hierarchical decision making, largely based on the large-scale organization that acts in a known industry. Effectual logics follows a reversed pattern where prediction is replaced by focusing on taking control of the current situation. In effectuation, an entrepreneur sees to his or her means in order to be in control of the situation, since making decisions in uncertainty makes predictability impossible. Hence, effectuation does not begin with a specific goal. Instead, it begins with a given set of means and allows goals to emerge continually over time. Saraswati contrasts causal actors as generals seeking to conquer fertile lands and effectual actors as explorers setting out on voyages into uncharted waters. Effectuation as an entrepreneurial decision-making logic is largely bound to what Knight referred to as true uncertainty and takes place in highly non-programmed situations, where the entrepreneur is restricted by its bounded rationality, information scarcity, and limited time as well as their prior experience. Effectuation is a decision-making logic that was developed through understanding how expert entrepreneurs make decisions in different entrepreneurial situations in the venture creation process. In particular, Saraswati argued that effectual logic is specifically beneficial when being in the suicide quadrant, where both the product and the market is new. The logic is built around three primary questions: who am I, what do I know, and whom do I know? Therefore, effectuation can be seen as a decision-making logic built on heuristics. Heuristics is a primary function human use in problem solving, which is based on experience. It is a practical method not guaranteed to be optimal, but sufficient to reach the shorthand goal of solving the current problem. Examples of heuristic problem-solving techniques are trial and error, intuitive judgment, which is built on gut feeling, generalization based on small samples, such as prior personal experience in similar situations in the past. To further answer the three primary questions, effectuation is built on 5 principles: bird in hand, affordable loss, crazy quilt, lemonade, pilot in the plane. The first principle is called bird in hand, which focuses on means. So it asks the 3 questions: who I am, what do I know, and who do I know? These 3 primary questions act as an initial step to imagine possibilities that originate from the means. The second principle, affordable loss, focuses on the downside of taking control of how much one can lose in a given situation. The principle of affordable loss is built on the understanding on how expert entrepreneurs limit risk by focusing on what they can afford to lose at each step of the venture creation process, instead of seeking all or nothing opportunities. The third principle, crazy quilt, focuses on co-creation with selected stakeholders. Expert entrepreneurs build relations with stakeholders they self-select. Through obtaining pre-commitments from key partners early in the venture creation process, expert entrepreneurs reduce uncertainty and instead co-create the new market with the self-selected partners. The fourth principle, lemonade, focuses on leveraging contingencies. Expert entrepreneurs invite the surprise factor. Instead of making what-if scenarios to deal with worst cases, experts interpret bad news and surprises as potential clues to create new markets. The fifth principle, pilot in the plane, focuses on taking control over the uncertain situation, instead of trying to predict and set future goals. By focusing in on activities within their control, expert entrepreneurs know their actions will result in desired outcomes. Hence, from an effectual logic, the future is neither found nor predicted, but rather made. It is, as Saraswati argues, however, important to point out that the same person can use both causal and effectual reasoning at different times, depending on what the circumstances call for. To conclude this discussion, when discussing entrepreneurship and venture creation, the importance of knowing about how to make decisions under risk or uncertainty is important, as it will guide how to proceed. It is especially important when entrepreneurs utilize different logics in their decision making. Hence, through existing research, we know that depending on what type of business decisions that an entrepreneur is facing, it will determine how she or he will continue to make decisions in the current situation she or he is facing. Thank you.